blood never washes out, not even from the kitchen. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Take a second and comment where you're watching from. I read every single one. You make this storytelling adventure unforgettable. Into the case. When the doorbell rang at 10 minutes past 11 on a Wednesday morning, I didn't get up right away. That's not laziness, it's strategy. In the Nero Wolfe brownstone, uninvited mid-morning callers are either lunatics, reporters, or prospective, clients too nervous to wait until a decent hour. I gave it another ring before I strolled down the hall, because patience is a virtue, especially when it buys you a few extra pages of a spicy crime novel. The guy on the stoop wasn't the usual. Variety. He had on a white chef's coat with his name, Raoul, embroidered over the chest. The coat was open, revealing a slate-colored T-shirt, and he wore an apron that looked like it had been through 3 world wars. The stains were reddish-brown and concentrated around the waist, a battlefield of sauces, and I had the odd impression something darker. He didn't ask for me. "I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe," he said, gripping the apron like a security blanket. "Privately, it's urgent." "That's a popular sentiment around here," I told him. "You and every crackpot with a theory about the Lindbergh baby. State your business and I'll decide if it's worth passing along." "I work at Le Cèdre," he said. I raised a brow. Le Cèdre was one of those sleek new French joints that had the Manhattan food critics tripping over their tongues and the social media foodies fumbling with their filters. More importantly, it was a place where Wolfe had dispatched me twice in the last month to retrieve inferior trout and observe the treatment of mushrooms. "I'm the sous chef," Raoul added. "But," he glanced down at the apron, like it had betrayed him, "someone's dead, in the kitchen, this morning, and I think I'm next." Well, that had enough zing to get my attention. I waved him in. Wolfe was in the plant rooms, as usual, pretending not to be available. Fritz, however, poked his head out from the kitchen with eyebrows at full mast when he saw our guest. "You brought a chef into the house?" he asked, stage whispering like the Pope had wandered in wearing jeans. "Calm down," I said. "He's not here to audition." Raoul sat gingerly on the red settee in the office, his fingers twitching on the armrest. He was the kind of man who had probably never sat still in his life. Lean frame, Mediterranean complexion, and eyes that kept scanning the room like a guy who'd lost something important. His alibi, maybe. When Wolfe finally came down at noon, moving with the weighty grace of a barge turning into harbor, he stopped, cold at the sight of Raoul. "I smell saffron," Wolfe said. Raoul twitched. "Yes, sir. I was in the middle of prepping paella when I found her." "Her?" Wolfe took his chair and aimed his bulk at it like a missile. "You will explain." "Yes, sir. I found head chef Odette Renaud this morning, in the cold storage, stabbed, with her own filleting knife." Wolfe's lips flattened. "You have contacted the police?" "Not yet." Raoul rubbed a hand down the bloody apron. "I ran. Straight here. I remembered your name. You dined at Le Cèdre. You sent that man," he gestured at me, "to inspect our porcini. You know how Odette was. Precise, ruthless genius." "Egotist?" Wolfe suggested mildly. Raoul gave a short, sad laugh. "That too, but she didn't deserve to die like that." "Why not the police?" I asked. He looked at me, then Wolfe. "Because I'm the one they'll suspect. I argued with her last night, loudly in front of the staff about the new menu. And because," he lifted the apron, "this was found stuffed behind the prep counter. My apron, with blood that's not mine." "Phooey," Wolfe muttered. "It's not just that," Raoul said. "Chef Renaud had enemies, real ones. She was going to fire our pastry chef, expose a health code violation to get a rival shut down, and she'd just signed a deal with a high-end investor from Milan. A secret deal. I overheard her on the phone last week." I glanced at Wolfe. His expression hadn't changed, but his fingers were drumming against the chair arm. That was the equivalent of fireworks and sirens from him. "You wish to retain me?" Wolfe asked. Raoul hesitated. "Yes, I want you to find out who really killed her, and to prove it wasn't me." "Why?" He looked away. "I didn't like her. But I owed her. She taught me everything. She pulled me out of a restaurant basement in Queens and put me next to Michelin stars. I wouldn't kill her. Not like that." Wolfe closed his eyes. He stayed that way for 10 seconds. Then he opened them and said, "Mr. Goodwin will accompany you to Le Cèdre. You will say nothing to the police until we permit it. You will cooperate. With him fully. You'll take the case?" Raoul asked, half relieved, half stunned. "Yes," Wolfe said, eyes heavy-lidded. "Because someone who stains a kitchen apron so carelessly is either innocent or clever enough to be interesting." Raoul left at 12:45, with instructions to stall and distract any law enforcement who might arrive. Wolfe called Fritz in to discuss the possibility of grilled octopus for dinner, which was his version of stretching his legs. Before heading out, I paused by the door. "You really think the guy's innocent?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said. "I think he is frightened. And he brought me a mystery laced with ambition, rivalry, and haute cuisine. It is rare to receive all three before lunch." He opened a book and waved me out like smoke. By the time I hit the pavement outside Le Cèdre, the lunch rush was nowhere. In sight. That made sense. Dead chefs tend to be bad for business, even if the dining room hasn't heard the news yet. Raoul had peeled off down a side alley like a guy who wanted to be near the kitchen, but not too near the crime scene. I let him sweat a few minutes while I took a walk around the block. Le Cèdre squatted between a wine bar and an art gallery that sold modern pieces with names like Futility in beige number 3. The restaurant's exterior was understated. Black awning, gold script, windows that only let you see what they wanted you to. That's fashionable these days. Make it hard to see what's inside and people will assume it's worth looking at. Inside, the maitre d' was trying too hard to look busy. I gave him a smile that said, "Health inspector with a badge" in my pocket and breezed past. Raoul met me halfway through the kitchen, pale but composed. He didn't bother with a greeting, just jerked his chin toward a side door. In there. The cold storage room smelled like lemons and steel, and something far less pleasant trying to hide under both. The body of Odette Renaud lay awkwardly between two crates of chilled oysters. Her chef's jacket was spattered crimson, and her neck bore the kind of wound that leaves no room for second chances. The filleting knife, thin, flexible, and vicious, was still in her hand, or rather, placed to look like it had never left it. "You moved her?" I asked Raoul. "No," he said quickly. "She was like that when I found her, knife still in her grip, but the blood, there's not enough of it, not on the floor. That's not how she died." He was right. The apron he'd brought me had more blood on it than the tiles beneath her. If she'd been stabbed here, there'd be more splash. So either she'd been killed somewhere else and staged here for drama, or the killer had been unusually neat. Either way, it meant thought, planning. That bumped it up the food chain from panic to motive. I looked back at Raoul. "Give me the lay of the land." He nodded, stepping into work mode with the ease of someone used to constant chaos. "Chef, Odette usually arrived early, 6:30. I got here just before 8. I found her like this at 8:15, just before we started prep. I panicked. He grimaced. I knew how it looked. I left. Thought maybe if I could get to Wolfe. First, who else was here? By 8, probably 4 people. Lucia, our pastry chef, Jory, the line cook, Dante, dishwasher, and Leonard, the sommelier. He came in early today to meet with Odette. You sure about that? I heard them arguing. Something about presentation and profit over principle. He turned and gestured toward the kitchen door. They're all here, nobody's left. I told them the police were on their way, which technically I assume is true now. It was. Before heading over, I'd called Inspector Kramer's direct line and left a brief but informative message. It was one of our many non-agreements, me holding off a report just long enough for Wolfe to get a whiff of the mystery, Kramer storming in just as things got interesting. Wolfe said it was tactical tension. Kramer called it obstruction. Either way, it worked. I stepped into the main kitchen. The tension was thicker than the veal stock bubbling at the back. Lucia, the pastry chef, was standing stiff at the prep counter, twisting a towel between her hands like she wanted to strangle it. She had short, neat hair, precision cut like the tarts she probably baked, and her whites were spotless. Jory, the line cook, was cleaning an already clean cutting board with the fervor of a man trying to scrub out memory. He was young, freckled and twitchy. Dante was wiping glasses at the back sink, silent, watchful, invisible, in the way a good dishwasher always is. And Leonard, tall and elegant in a navy blazer, leaned against the wall like a sommelier who'd realized his tasting notes didn't matter anymore. I introduced myself, keeping it simple. Name's Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe. We're investigating the death of Chef Renaud. The police will be here shortly. Until then, nobody leaves, nobody deletes text messages, and nobody decides, now's a good time for a smoke break. That got me a few nervous glances and one muttered protest. I pointed to Leonard. Let's start with you. You had a meeting with Odette this morning? I did, he said smoothly. At 7:30. She asked to discuss expanding the wine program. She had ambitions. What kind? She wanted to push for more creative pairings. Odette thought the old guard, the investors, the critics, were stifling her vision. She believed I could help persuade them, that my connections mattered. Did they? He hesitated. Not enough. I told her I'd do what I could, but she needed allies, not just experts. She didn't take that well. So you argued. A disagreement, not uncommon. She was passionate. I filed that under artful dodging, level 2, then turned to Lucia. You and the chef, friendly terms. She flinched. I admired her. She was difficult, brilliant, demanding. But Lucia swallowed. She said my croquembouche was soulless. Last week, in front of a food blogger. That explained the towel strangulation. She threatened your job? No, but she let me know she could. Then Jory. He shrugged before I asked. I didn't kill her. I wouldn't even know how. I cut onions and try not to screw up the risotto. Did you argue with her? Not me, but I saw Dante and her go at it last night. Real fight. He smashed a tray. Dante stiffened. Is that true? I asked. She called me replaceable. Like I'm just a guy with a sponge. He crossed his arms. I've been here longer than Jory, longer than Raoul. I trained half these people. She wanted me gone. And now she is, I said. His eyes flashed. I didn't kill her, but I'm not going to pretend I'm sad she's dead. That did it. We had motive, and one bloody apron, but no real timeline, no weapon, movement, no fingerprints, and no confirmation yet on who had access to the cold storage before Raoul. The killer had planned it, that was clear, and they wanted Raoul to take the fall. I glanced around the kitchen again. The atmosphere wasn't just tense, it was combustible. Everyone here had the motive, everyone had the means, and everyone had the opportunity, provided they timed it. Right? I excused myself, walked out back and called Wolfe. He answered on the third ring, which meant he was expecting me. Well, it's a buffet of suspects, all working under one roof, all mad at the deceased, all with access to a sharp knife and a chilling closet. I'm going to need Saul to dig into their financials, and maybe a whisper in Lon Cohen's ear to see if anything's circulating about Le Cèdre and its investors. And Mr. Raoul? Still wearing guilt like a borrowed coat. He's either scared stiff or playing a long game. There is no long game, Wolfe said. This is not a subtle murder. It is theatrical. Blood on an apron, a body laid out like an offering. Someone wants to be seen as clever. I paused. So what now? Now, Wolfe said, you will invite them all to the brownstone. Not today, tomorrow, at 4 o'clock. I will observe. Them. This is no longer a kitchen quarrel, it is a performance, and I intend to watch the cast. Then he hung up, and just like that, I had dinner reservations for 6 people and a dead chef on ice. I spent the next day chasing ghosts through background checks and piecing together the culinary soap opera behind Le Cèdre's glossy menus. Saul Panzer, our resident phantom bloodhound, delivered a dossier by mid-morning sharp. He didn't stick around, just handed me a slim envelope and vanished before Fritz could offer him coffee. The file painted a spicy picture. Lucia, the pastry chef with the strangled dish towel, was in the middle of a bitter divorce from a sous chef at another high-end bistro. Word was, Odette had been sleeping with him. That would have been just restaurant gossip, except Lucia had once filed a complaint against Odette for creating a hostile emotional environment, which disappeared after a closed-door meeting with ownership. Jory, the twitchy line cook, had 3 write-ups in the last 2 months. Poor punctuality, improper handling of knives, and a snippy remark about Odette's tyrannical mood swings overheard by a patron. Not great, not deadly, unless you combined it with the fact he stood to inherit a chunk of family money if he stuck to stable employment for 6 months straight. He was 2 weeks shy. Dante, the dishwasher, had the longest history with the restaurant and the shortest fuse. His personnel file was glowing, until 2 weeks ago, when a sudden demotion put him back on night shift after an incident involving a misplaced truffle shipment. Raoul's note at the time, chef's orders, and Leonard, the sommelier in a blazer, was charming, well-connected, and flat broke. His father had cut him off 6 months ago. Odette had apparently been his golden goose, a Michelin-starred launchpad for his own line of high-end wine bars. Problem was, she was planning to cut him out of the Milan investment deal. All 4 suspects had motives that could hold water in a sieve. All 4 would be arriving at the brownstone at 4 o'clock sharp. Wolfe had ordered arrangements for 5 chairs, 4 for the guests, 1 for Raoul, who was now nervously awaiting his fate under our roof. Wolfe would not join us immediately, of course. That would be vulgar. When 4 o'clock hit, I was standing by the door. Fritz hovered nearby with a tray of lemon water, looking like he'd been asked to serve raw sewage. Wolfe had declared it would be unseemly to serve anything more refined during a murder inquiry. Lucia arrived first. She was wearing a trim, navy dress and a look that could chill aspic. Jory followed, underdressed and over-perfumed. He offered a limp handshake and asked if there'd be snacks. I pretended not to hear. Dante came third, still in his work boots, eyes darting like a man expecting to be frisked. And finally Leonard, wearing cologne strong enough to kill bacteria, and a scarf that screamed "I read Camus in cafes." I led them to Wolfe's office, where Raoul was already seated, hands folded tightly in his lap. The others stared him down. Like he was the entree at a judgment banquet, Wolfe didn't appear. Not yet. "Mr. Wolfe will join us shortly," I said, taking a casual seat by the globe. "In the meantime, let's try a little group therapy. You're all here because someone killed Odette Renault, and someone tried to pin it on our friend Raoul. That's a problem. For him, obviously. But also for you, because Mr. Wolfe doesn't like messy accusations, and he especially doesn't like bad food." "Is this legal?" Jory asked. "I mean, shouldn't we have lawyers?" "You're not under arrest. Yet. But that can be arranged." Lucia glared at him. "For God's sake, stop talking. I'm just saying." Leonard cut in smoothly. "Mr. Goodwin, are we here to answer questions or be accused?" I shrugged. "Depends how you answer. I let the silence stretch until it got brittle. Then Wolfe's voice broke it like a chisel. "Mr. Goodwin, that will suffice." The door behind me opened, and Wolfe entered. No ceremony, no sound but the whisper of fabric and the collective tightening of spines. He moved to his chair with imperial slowness, and lowered himself into it like an oracle settling in for judgment. "I have no intention of wasting time," he said. "Each of you had reason to dislike Chef Renaud. That is a common currency in professional kitchens, but dislike does not equate to murder. Malice, however, particularly malice concealed beneath precision, is quite another matter." He gestured slightly toward Raoul. "This man has been accused, if not formally, then by implication. The evidence against him is shallow but theatrical. Blood on an apron, a motive for rage. It is almost too convenient. So I began by asking a question. Who among you has the temperament to plan a murder in a kitchen, stage it for dramatic impact, and plant evidence that might satisfy a hasty investigation?" Lucia shifted. Leonard sat perfectly still. Wolfe's eyes moved from one to the next. "Let us consider alternatives. Miss Lucia, you had reason to resent Odette personally and professionally. You once accused her of manipulation. You withdrew the accusation. Why?" Lucia's jaw clenched. "Because she threatened my job, my reputation. She also took up with your ex-husband." "Yes," she said flatly, "and he deserved her." That earned a glance from Jory. Wolfe continued, "You are capable of precision, of delicate work under pressure. Tell me, how many ways could you kill a woman in a kitchen without being caught?" Lucia met his gaze. "More than I care to admit." "But I didn't." "I believe you," Wolfe said. "You lack the inclination to stage. You would have left the blade where it fell." He turned. "Mr. Dante." The dishwasher stiffened. "You argued with the victim. You were demoted. You felt overlooked and insulted. But you are not subtle. You are proud. To leave a bloody apron behind and flee would go against your nature." Dante blinked. "I didn't flee." "Precisely. That's why you didn't kill her." Wolfe pivoted. "Mr. Jory, you have motive. Your employment was fragile, you resented oversight, but the body was arranged with care. The murder tool chosen for symbolism. You, sir, used dull knives." "I resent that," Jory muttered. "As you should," Wolfe said, unfazed. That left. Wolfe shifted his weight and looked directly at Leonard. "Ah, the sommelier." Leonard arched a brow. "You flatter me." "You're charming, articulate, and opportunistic," Wolfe said. "You positioned yourself as a future partner in the Milan investment, but Odette planned to replace you. You knew it. You heard her making arrangements." Leonard said nothing. "You went to her early," Wolfe said. "Before the others arrived, you confronted her. She refused to include you, so you killed her. You used the filleting knife, knowing it would be dramatic. You placed the body in the cold storage, both symbolic and practical. You kept her hand on the knife, wiped down surfaces, and took an apron from the rack. Then you staged it behind the counter, knowing Raoul would grab it later. He did during prep. When blood was noticed, panic did the rest." Leonard tilted his head, as if considering whether to deny it. Wolfe went on. "You misjudged Raoul's instincts. He fled not to escape, but to seek truth. That is your error." The silence was complete. Then Leonard laughed, once, lightly. "Bravo. You missed your calling, the theater." "You missed yours," Wolfe said. "As a criminal." Kramer entered the office precisely 1 minute later, summoned an hour earlier on my signal. Wolfe didn't like delays during curtain call. Leonard didn't resist. He just stood, smoothed his scarf, and said, "She always underestimated me." Wolfe murmured, "As did I, but only once." Kramer cuffed him and led him out. The others remained seated, stunned. Wolfe exhaled deeply. "Mr. Goodwin, dinner." I nodded, guiding the others to the door. Raoul hesitated. "Why did you believe me?" Wolfe closed his eyes. Because your fear was genuine, but your grief was not. You loved her food, not the woman. Raoul blinked. That's true. I know, Wolfe said. Now go and send my compliments to the new head chef. Tell her the blood sausage is off the menu. The next morning began like most mornings do in the brownstone, with Wolfe still upstairs tending to his orchids, Fritz simmering something that smelled like heaven with a French accent, and me reading the paper, trying not to get jam on the front page. It should have been the lull after the storm. We had a confession, a collar, and Kramer even grunted a word of appreciation on his way out last night, which in Inspector Reese is the equivalent of bursting into tears of joy. But I've learned something working for Nero Wolfe. When a case seems too neat, too wrapped up, too solved, that's exactly when you double-check the knots. Around 9:15, Wolfe buzzed for me. I dropped the paper and headed up to the plant rooms. The place smelled like bark and moisture and smugness. Wolfe didn't look up. From the orchid he was coaxing along with a miniature brush that cost more than my best suit. Archie, you have the disposition of a man still chewing a gristle of doubt. I prefer to think of it as professional indigestion, I said. Leonard confessed, sure, but it was tidy, too tidy. The blood on Raoul's apron, the lack of fingerprints, the knife left in her hand. It's like he wanted to be caught, but not right away. That smell funny to you? He grunted. Your instincts are rarely wrong. Have you checked the timing? That's just it. It doesn't line up as clean as we thought. I pulled out my notebook and flipped it open. According to Raoul, Odette was alive at 6:30 when she called someone. We assumed it was Leonard, but the call logs came back this morning. She spoke with her sister. That puts her alive at 6:37 a.m. Wolfe finally looked up, and Leonard claims he arrived at 7:30. Exactly, which gives a neat symmetrical hour for her to die and get staged. But if she was alive at 6:37 and dead by 8:15 when Raoul found her, that's a pretty broad window. And we've only got his word on that timeline, Wolfe sighed. Pfui. We have a confession. Why seek ambiguity where the law finds clarity? I shrugged. Because we're not the law. That earned me a long, heavy glance. Then Wolfe muttered something unpleasant in German and headed for the elevator. 15 minutes later, we were in the office, the morning sun splashing the room with light that made Fritz's polished surfaces gleam like they were trying to win an award. Get me Raoul, Wolfe said. I called. Raoul answered like he'd been holding the phone since dawn. Come, Wolfe instructed, bring Lucia, and only Lucia. Raoul didn't ask why. He just said, yes, sir, and hung up. They arrived an hour later. Raoul looked haunted. Lucia looked annoyed. I thought this was over, she said, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. Indeed, but something persists, Wolfe replied. You spoke fondly of Chef Renaud's abilities, Miss Lucia. I require clarity. What kind of clarity? She was found with her filleting knife. Would she have used that for pastry? Lucia frowned. No, that knife stayed in the fish station. She hated cross-contamination. Curious, Wolfe murmured. Then it could not have been at her personal station, and yet the bloodied apron was found tucked behind the prep counter, your domain. Was it not? Lucia blinked. Yes, but I didn't... No, of course not. I do not believe you staged the murder, but I do believe you were the last person to see Odette Renaud alive. Raoul stiffened. What are you saying? Wolfe steepled his fingers. Miss Lucia, you arrived before Jory, correct? Yes, around 7, and the kitchen was already occupied. Lucia paused. Yes, Odette was there. She was talking to someone on the phone. Then I heard her arguing with someone in the hallway near cold storage. I assumed it was Leonard. Why assume? Wolfe asked. Lucia hesitated. Because the voice was male. And Leonard had been on thin ice. I figured it was his swan song. Did you see them? No, she admitted. I didn't want to get involved. Yet you remained. You baked. She gave a shrug that was pure, weary pride. We still had a brunch service. Wolfe's eyes closed. Of course, he gestured. That will do for now. Mr. Goodwin will see you out. Once they were gone, I turned to him. You think she's lying? Not entirely, Wolfe said. But she withheld something. More than once I waited. He didn't elaborate. Instead, he said, We must speak with Dante. Alone. Dante arrived just after 1. He still looked like he'd slept in his boots, but there was something sharper in his eyes now. Like he'd been waiting for another. Drowned Wolfe didn't waste time. Mr. Dante, you were passed over for promotion in favor of Raoul. That chafed. Did you believe Chef Renaud made the decision herself? Dante frowned. Of course. She was the boss. Was she? Wolfe asked. Or was she manipulated? Dante hesitated. What do you mean? Wolfe leaned forward slightly. Suppose someone wanted you out of the picture. Suppose someone convinced her that you were a liability, that your temper made you a danger to the kitchen. Dante gave a humorless laugh. Plenty of people could have said that, Jory Lucia. Raoul? Wolfe asked gently. Dante froze. I spoke up. You think Raoul set you up? Dante's jaw clenched. It crossed my mind. Wolfe nodded. Then tell me, when you arrived that morning, what did you see? Dante's eyes flicked to me, then back. I saw Raoul near the cold storage. Looking nervous. He said he was checking inventory, but he jumped when I came in. That was around 7:45. And you said nothing. Dante shrugged. Didn't seem like my business, until the screaming started. Wolfe was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Thank you, that will be all. After Dante left, I dropped into my chair. All right, let's put this together. Lucia hears an argument but doesn't see the speaker. Dante sees Raoul acting twitchy by the cold storage. Raoul claims he found the body at 8:15, but if he was already back there by 7:45, he lied, Wolfe said. Not about discovering the body, but about when. I frowned. Why would he lie about the timing? To give himself an alibi, and to pin the window squarely on Leonard. But why? Raoul came to us. He asked for help. Wolfe's face was grim. Because he believed we would do exactly what we did. Focus on Leonard. Raoul knew Odette was planning to replace him. He overheard the investor deal. He thought she'd cut him out. The apron was no accident. He wanted it found. Just not too early. I stared at him. But why confess now? Why not let Leonard take the fall? Wolfe opened a drawer and took out a letter. Because this arrived this morning. He passed it to me. It was from a lawyer. A new witness had come forward, a prep cook who saw Raoul near the cold storage at 7:30, looking shaken and wiping something on his apron. The lawyer was representing Leonard and threatening to withdraw the confession as coerced. So Raoul panicked, I said. He tried to beat the clock and frame someone who was already halfway guilty. Wolfe nodded. Prepare to bring them. All back tomorrow at 4. I sighed. Another office gathering? Wolfe arched a brow. Justice, Mr. Goodwin, is best served twice, if the first course was undercooked. The next day, just before 4, I found myself setting out the chairs in Wolfe's office like I was hosting a very polite firing squad. We'd done this once already, and if Wolfe had his way, we'd do it with metronome precision. Suspects, lined up like jars on a shelf, each one labeled and waiting to be uncorked. The difference today was that the wine had turned sour. Fritz brought in lemon water again, with a barely concealed sigh, and I double-checked the placement of the chairs, 4 for the suspects, 1 for Raoul, and Wolfe's throne dead center. Like Zeus waiting on a thundercloud. Wolfe hadn't emerged yet, but I could hear him pacing overhead, which meant he was chewing on the bones of the problem before descending to crack the skull. By 4:01, all the guests had arrived. Lucia was dressed in the same severe navy as before, her arms crossed like she was attending a hostile board meeting. Jory showed up in a sweater that didn't quite hide the sweat patches under his arms. Dante's boots left faint traces on the parquet floor, which Fritz would murder him for later. And Raoul, the man of the hour, or maybe of the final hour, sat upright and silent, hands folded too neatly in his lap. Wolfe entered at 4:05, which was his version of dramatic flair. He settled in without greeting anyone, simply took his seat, and waited for the room to grow still. "You are here," he began, "because I was wrong." That got their attention. "I believed the death of Chef Renaud was a crime of ambition, a clean line from motive to method, staged with dramatic clarity by a man who feared replacement and saw opportunity in chaos. That man was Mr. Leonard. He confessed, and the law was briefly satisfied. But the truth, as it sometimes does, refused to stay buried." He looked to Raoul. "Mr. Goodwin, if you please." I stepped forward, holding the envelope Wolfe had given me just before coming down. "This," I said, "is a statement from a prep cook at Le Cèdre, a guy named Gideon. Not important in the kitchen hierarchy, but the kind of guy who sees everything because no one notices him. He saw Raoul near the cold storage around 7:30 a.m. the day of the murder. Said he was pale and wiping something on his apron. Raoul didn't notice him, but Gideon noticed Raoul." I handed Wolfe the letter, more for effect than necessity. He didn't read it aloud, just placed it neatly on the table. "Raoul," Wolfe said, "you told us you discovered the body at 8:15. Why did you lie?" Raoul's hands twitched in his lap. "I was scared. I panicked. I thought if I came clean I'd be blamed." "You were involved," Wolfe said calmly. "So that fear was not without basis." Lucia snapped her gaze toward Raoul. "You killed her?" "I didn't mean to," Raoul said quickly. She told me I was out. Not just out of the head chef role, out of the restaurant. She said she was replacing me with a chef from Milan, one of the investor's protégés. She didn't even tell me in person. I overheard it on the phone." He glanced around the room, his eyes glassy. "So I went to talk to her that morning. I thought maybe I could change her mind. But she laughed. Said I should be grateful she let me ride her coattails for as long as I did. That I was a kitchen drone, not a leader." He swallowed. "I snapped. I grabbed the knife, one of the filleting ones on the counter. I didn't even think. It was fast. She fell. There was so much blood." Wolfe's voice didn't rise. "And then?" I cleaned the counter, wiped the knife and put it in her hand. I dragged her into cold storage and set her down like she was holding it when she fell. But there wasn't enough blood in there. It looked wrong. I knew it would look wrong. "So you staged the apron," Wolfe said. Raoul nodded. "I grabbed one from the dirty pile and smeared it with blood from the knife, then stuffed it behind the counter where I knew I'd find it later. I thought if I found the body and the apron, maybe I could control the story. Maybe I could steer suspicion toward Leonard. They already hated each other." "And the confession?" I asked. "How do you explain him taking the fall?" Raoul shook his head. "I don't know. I guess he thought the evidence was worse than it was. Or maybe he thought he could talk his way out of it later. I didn't ask him to confess." "No," Wolfe said. "But you gave him reason to." Lucia stood up, her chair screeching. "You killed her over a job?" "She was everything to me," Raoul shouted. "She was my whole career, my mentor, my anchor. And then she cut me loose like I was nothing." Jory made a low sound. "You always acted like you owned that kitchen, like you were second in command of the universe." Raoul ignored him. Wolfe leaned back. Odette Renaud made many enemies, but only one of them had the mixture of ego, fear, and proximity necessary to end her life in such a calculated way. "You." There was a long silence. Then softly Dante said, "She wasn't a saint, but she didn't deserve that." "No," Wolfe agreed. "She did not." I stood and opened the door. Kramer was waiting in the front hall, as punctual as guilt. He stepped in, took one look at Raoul's face and said, "Well, hell." 10 minutes later, Raoul was in cuffs. Kramer was growling something about paperwork, and I was pouring Wolfe his beer. He took a sip and closed his eyes, as if the carbonation had moral weight. Fritz entered to announce dinner, duck confit with roasted fennel and orange glaze. Wolfe nodded but didn't rise. "You were right," I said. "Again." "Eventually," Wolfe murmured. "What gave?" "It away?" "The apron," he said. "A truly guilty man would have burned it. Raoul was a cook. He understood contamination, presentation, and perception. The choice to stage the apron instead of destroying it was not panic. It was narrative. Construction. That required motive." I whistled. "And here I thought it was just sloppy framing." "No," Wolfe said. "Sloppy framing is for amateurs. Raoul was a professional, and that," he added, rising slowly, "is what undid him." As we headed to the dining room, Wolfe paused at the threshold. "Mr. Goodwin, let us agree. Ambition makes for fine seasoning, but it is no substitute for restraint." I nodded. "Sure, as long as you don't ask me to eat blood sausage." He winced. "Phooey." Dinner was served. Justice, as usual, had been delivered just in time to preserve the appetite. Dinner that evening went down smoother than expected, considering we'd just exposed a murderer for the second time in as many days. Fritz outdid himself with the duck confit, crisp skin, tender meat, and just enough of that orange glaze to remind you that life could still be sweet, even when it had recently included a dead chef and a staged crime scene. Wolfe, predictably, didn't mention the case over the meal. For him, conversation at the table was as sacred as the table itself. He didn't want to hear about motives and manipulation while he was savoring fennel. I respected that boundary, mostly because Fritz's glares were lethal, but also because I had my own thoughts to chew on. The case had snapped into place in the end, sure, but something about it still felt layered. After dessert, pear tart, perfectly caramelized, I retreated to the office with my coffee, while Wolfe waddled back upstairs to his orchids like a man with no more questions in the world. I wasn't so lucky. I kept thinking about Lucia. Her reaction when Raoul confessed hadn't sat right. She hadn't seemed surprised. She'd seemed relieved. And then there was Jory, too quiet, too twitchy, and Dante, calm when he shouldn't have been. They all had reasons to want Odette gone. Just because Raoul had snapped first didn't mean the others hadn't helped set the stage, so I did what any good operative does when his gut itches. I went looking for something to scratch it. The next morning, I called Le Cèdre. Gideon, the prep cook who'd made Raoul sweat, answered. I recognized his voice from our brief phone exchange. I introduced myself again and asked if he'd mind swinging by the brownstone for a quick chat. I offered lunch. He said yes before I even mentioned Fritz's cooking. He showed up at 1 now, young and wiry, with hands stained faintly purple from beets, and an air of someone who'd learned to walk quietly in kitchens to avoid being noticed or blamed. Wolfe remained upstairs, so I took Gideon into the front room. "Thanks for coming," I said. "You're not in trouble. In fact, your statement helped crack this case wide open." He nodded. "I'm glad. I didn't want to say anything at first, but when I heard what happened and how fast they blamed Leonard, it didn't sit right." I offered him a glass of Fritz's lemonade and leaned forward. "Tell me something, Gideon. What was the vibe in the kitchen that week, before the murder?" Gideon gave a short laugh. "Tense. Like louder than usual. Tension. Lucia and Jory were fighting constantly. Dante was muttering about being pushed out. Raoul looked like he hadn't slept. And Odette, she was in her own world. She stopped talking to people unless she was giving an order." "Did anyone know about the investor deal?" Gideon nodded. "Lucia did. I overheard them talking 2 nights before it happened. Lucia said something like, 'You're trading us all for Milan money.' And Odette told her, "I'm building something real, not babysitting egos." That fit. Raoul wasn't the only one who thought he was getting tossed aside. And if Lucia knew what was coming, maybe Raoul's outburst had only accelerated what someone else was already planning. "Did Raoul seem violent to you?" I asked. Gideon hesitated. "No, he was frustrated, but not like Jory. Jory slammed a pan down so hard one night it bent the handle." "What set him off?" "I think he thought Odette was going to fire him." "Was she?" Gideon gave a helpless shrug. "I don't know. She didn't tell me things. But I saw her writing notes. Personnel stuff. She was cleaning house. You could feel it. Anything else you noticed? Even if it seems small." He leaned back, thinking, "Well, this is probably nothing, but the night before she died, someone took her key." "Her what?" "Her cold storage key. It's this brass key that hangs by her station. She's super strict about who uses it, so it's always in the same spot. But that night, it was gone. She was pissed. Thought someone moved it." "Did she find it?" "No, not that I know of." Now that, I thought, was interesting, because Raoul had said nothing about needing a key to open cold storage when he found the body. And if he'd used that key to stage the body, he must have had it before Odette was dead. Which meant I stood. "You've been a huge help." "Gideon, Fritz has some turkey and mushroom sandwiches I think you'll like. Wait in the dining room." When he was gone, I marched up to Wolfe's plant room. He was misting a cluster of anguloas with the solemnity of a bishop blessing wine. "We're not finished," I told him. He didn't look at me. "Explain." "Raoul killed her." "Yes." But someone gave him the setup. That got his attention. He turned slightly. "A co-conspirator?" "Not necessarily. More like an emotional accomplice. Someone who knew he was unstable and nudged him toward the edge. I filled him in. The key, the fights, the staff knowing about the investor, the apron being placed too perfectly. Wolfe absorbed it all with a hum. And what do you propose, Lucia?" She goaded him, maybe even planted the idea that Odette was getting rid of him. She knew Raoul was on the edge. She just waited for him to snap, then stepped back. "Why?" Wolfe asked simply. She wanted Odette out but didn't want blood on her hands. And with Odette gone, she'd be next in line to move up. Raoul would be too broken to lead. Dante had already been benched. Jory's a mess. That left her. Wolfe considered. "Bring her. Now." Lucia arrived by 2:45, clearly tired of visits. To the brownstone, I offered her tea. She declined. "You have a new opportunity," Wolfe said. "Le Cèdre will need leadership. You intend to take it." She gave a careful smile. "If I'm offered it, I won't decline." Wolfe folded his hands. "You knew Raoul would snap. You encouraged it. Not with instructions, but with carefully deployed truths. You knew about Milan. You knew about the demotions. And you left the key where he could take it." Lucia's jaw tensed. "You didn't. Kill Odette. But you didn't stop Raoul either." "Is that a crime?" she asked softly. "No," Wolfe said. "But it is a tactic." She exhaled slowly. "She made all of us feel small. Every single one of us. I didn't push Raoul, I just didn't stop him. And that is the distinction," Wolfe said, "between a chef who curates ingredients and one who lets them burn." She stood. "Are you going to tell the police?" "No, but I will inform." "The investor?" Lucia flinched just slightly. "That's not justice," she said. "No," Wolfe said. "It's balance." She left without another word. I turned to Wolfe. "You really think she didn't plan it?" "No, but she did not commit murder. She simply watched a man become one." I nodded slowly. "So what do we tell Kramer?" "The truth," Wolfe said. "He can choose what to do with it. That is his burden. Ours is lifted." Later, that Evening, Fritz served lamb with rosemary juice. Wolfe was in good spirits, which meant he only corrected my grammar twice and didn't flinch when I poured myself a second glass of wine. As we finished, Wolfe leaned back and declared, "The kitchen. Mr. Goodwin is a theatre, and some actors prefer tragedy." I raised my glass. "Here's to a play well ended." He inclined his head. "And well digested." The next morning, rain washed over the city like it had something to prove. The view from the brownstone's front windows was all grey sheen and soggy tree branches. You'd think that meant a slow day. Good weather for orchids and breakfast and staying off the phone. But murder, like mildew, finds a way to bloom in damp conditions. I was just finishing my eggs and toast when Wolfe summoned me to the office. He was already in his chair, a book in one hand, the other resting on the arm like a bare paw, waiting to swat something that got too close. He didn't look up when I entered. "Mr. Goodwin, you will call Inspector Kramer." I paused, coffee cup in mid-air. I thought we already handed him the murderer and the unofficial accomplice. "This is not a continuation," Wolfe said. "It is a correction." That meant something had burrowed under his skin overnight, something he hadn't put words to yet. I dialed Kramer's number, knowing full well he wouldn't be thrilled. "When?" the inspector answered. He sounded like he was already on his third bad cup of station coffee. "Kramer." "Morning, Inspector. Wolfe wants to see you." "Oh, does he?" His tone could have peeled paint. "Why, did he forget to gloat yesterday?" "On the contrary," I said. "He wants to amend the record." That earned me a few seconds of silence. "I'll be there in an hour." Wolfe closed his book. "Prepare the room." By the time Kramer arrived, damp trench coat, tie loose, eyes bagged, Fritz had brewed coffee strong enough to threaten extradition treaties. Wolfe, of course, didn't offer any. Kramer sat without waiting to be asked. "This better not be another philosophical discussion about motive, Wolfe. We already booked Raoul, the DA has his confession, and the press is sniffing around." Wolfe sighed. "The confession will stand, but it must be placed in context." Kramer rolled his eyes. "Here we go." Wolfe's tone sharpened. "The law, Inspector, addresses guilt. I am concerned with truth. What Raoul did was his own act. But it was not isolated, he was manipulated. You're talking about Lucia." "Yes." "She didn't kill anyone." "No. But she nudged the stone that started the avalanche." Kramer leaned forward. "Are you suggesting I charge someone for letting a murder happen?" "No. I am suggesting you inform the Milan investors of her conduct. Let them decide whether she's suitable to lead the restaurant she inherited through silence." Kramer snorted. "You want me to act as your moral enforcer?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "No, Inspector. I want you to understand that law alone is not justice, and sometimes pointing out rot keeps the orchard healthy." That seemed to hit something in Kramer. He grunted, stood, and jammed on his hat. "I'll think about it, but don't expect sainthood." "I never have," Wolfe replied. Kramer was gone a minute later, leaving a trail of wet boot prints and unfinished grievances. I stood by the window, watching him vanish into the grey. "You really think they'll pull Lucia?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said, "but she will know they might, and that is sometimes punishment enough." The next few days passed in relative peace. The brownstone returned to its usual rhythms, Fritz in the kitchen, Wolfe with his orchids, me catching up on reports and alphabetizing files. Wolfe insisted we never need but must have. I figured that was the end of it. Case closed, balance restored, culinary bloodshed avenged. Then, just after lunch on a Friday, Saul Panzer showed up. Now, Saul never shows up, unless there's something you'll wish you hadn't heard but need to anyway. He was soaked from the rain, shrugged out of his coat and handed me a small manila envelope without a word. I brought it to Wolfe, who opened it with the care of a man handling a rare seed. Inside were 2 photographs. One showed a check, $10,000, made out to Gideon Lasky. The other was a shot of Gideon himself, handing something to Lucia behind Lycedra's rear alley door, her expression tight, Gideon's wary. I asked Saul to monitor them, Wolfe said without looking up. Insurance? You think he lied? I think he was paid to. I stared at the photos again. So Gideon saw Raoul near the cold storage, all right, but maybe not at 7:30, maybe later. Precisely. Perhaps he saw Raoul after the fact and agreed to backdate the sighting. Why? Because someone made it worth his while, Lucia, of course. She hadn't just nudged Raoul. She'd gone insurance shopping once Raoul started panicking, found a weak link, bought silence, and pointed us at Raoul with just the right timing. Clever, I muttered. Wolfe's voice was tight. Cleverness. Without scruple is a toxin. It pollutes everything it touches. I paced the room. You want to confront her again? No, that would be indulgent. I stopped. Then what? Wolfe considered. Write a letter. To who? To her. To the investors, to the press. Make 3 copies, do not send them, deliver them in person, let her see them, and leave them with Saul. Blackmail, I said, eyebrow raised. Exposure, Wolfe corrected, the moral equivalent. She will understand the threat. And if she calls our bluff, Wolfe finally looked up. She won't. Not if she wants to keep her little empire unsinged. The delivery was made the next morning. I found Lucia at Lycedra running the kitchen like a general with something to prove. I didn't ask for an appointment. I just handed her the envelope. What is this? She asked, eyeing me. Insurance against ambition's worst instincts. She opened it, read half a page, and went pale. You have no proof. Don't need it, I said. You know what you did. You paid Gideon. You rewrote a timeline. You manipulated Wolfe, me, the police. Her jaw clenched. You think you're some kind of avenger? No, I said, but I work for one. I left her standing in the middle of her gleaming kitchen, surrounded by fire and knives and the terrible clarity of being caught without a courtroom. That night, back at the brownstone, Wolfe didn't ask for a report. He didn't need one. Fritz served veal marsala. Wolfe poured himself a small glass of Malmsey, and after the first sip offered a single comment. Cooks, Mr. Goodwin, create flavor by layering. Some also learn to layer blame. I nodded. You think she'll step down? No, but she'll remember this. And Raoul? He will serve time. Perhaps he will write a cookbook in prison. Rage and reduction sauces, I chuckled. And us? Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. We will dine. And so we did. Knowing the crime had been solved, the lie exposed, and the truth, like the finest dish, reduced to its most potent essence. The following Monday, the brownstone exhaled into a familiar quiet, as though it too was recovering from the lingering scent of deception. Fritz returned to humming softly while prepping quince for dessert. Theodore was once again permitted to discuss his new cross-pollination technique with Wolfe during orchid time, and I was reacquainting myself with the idea that a day might pass without someone getting stabbed over foie gras. But you don't work for Nero Wolfe without developing a sixth sense, or maybe just a scarred instinct, for when the curtain hasn't quite dropped. And I had that feeling again, gnawing the edge of my coffee like a waiter waiting for the last check of the night. The thing about the end of a case is that it's never really the end. It's the last line of dialogue before the lights go out. But the audience? They're still sitting in the dark waiting to see who claps first. So when I got a call from Lon Cohen of the Gazette, I was already expecting it. Archie, Lon said in that carefully casual way of his. Off the record, was it true about Lucia Fay and the payoff? I didn't answer right away. How off the record? Off enough that I'm asking, not printing. Then yes, she paid off the prep cook. Bought his version of the timeline, neat little sleight of hand, he whistled. And you're not going public with it? We gave her the option to handle it privately. Saul has the letters. They're her sword of Damocles if she slips. You're giving her a second act. She didn't kill Odette, I said, and Wolfe doesn't care about headlines. He cares about control. Lon was silent a beat. It won't stay quiet forever. No, I said, but by the time it gets loud, she'll either be gone or a ghost. I hung up and leaned back in my chair, watching dust float in the warm light slicing through the office window. The truth didn't always need a trumpet. Sometimes it just needed a fuse. At exactly 11:15 that morning, Wolfe summoned me upstairs, not to the office, but to the plant rooms. That was rare. An invitation to the orchid sanctum usually meant one of two things. He was either going to scold me while inspecting a hybrid, or he wanted to indulge in conversation more speculative than practical. This was the latter. He stood near a shelf of Phalaenopsis, misting with a deft hand, eyes half-lidded. "You've been unsettled," he said. "I've been cautious," I replied. "We won the match, sure, but I don't like how the crowd keeps moving behind us." Wolfe made a noise somewhere between a grunt and a purr. "Understandable. It is not the crime that disturbs me now, Mr. Goodwin. It is the culture that bred it. You mean Le Cèdre?" "I mean the world beyond this house, a place where ambition is currency, and the cost is often hidden until the check arrives." I leaned against a support beam, careful not to brush the leaves. Lucia didn't need to kill Odette. She just had to plant the right seed and let the soil do the rest. "Indeed," Wolfe said. "She knew Raoul's psychology better than we did. She understood his desperation. She simply has watered it, and then made sure we found the right weeds." He turned slowly, putting the mister down on a linen-covered cart. "I am not a moralist," he said. "I do not presume to correct the ethics of strangers. But I do despise manipulation done under the guise of inevitability. Lucia acted like it was just bound to happen. She positioned herself as the consequence, not the cause." I nodded. "And Raoul? You think he's still rationalizing it?" "Undoubtedly. People do not admit to failing at restraint. They blame pressure, circumstance, provocation. And what about Jory and Dante? You think they'll let this die down?" "Dante will return to work. He has no illusions about justice. Jory is still young. He may learn from this, or he may find a new kitchen where shouting wins." I let that hang a moment. "You don't think the restaurant survives?" He turned back to the orchids. "Oh, it will survive, but not as it was. Something soured beneath the surface. The diners won't taste it, but the staff will." That afternoon, Fritz prepared a late lunch of trout almondine with haricots verts and a tarragon vinaigrette that could mend rivalries. Wolfe insisted on eating in the dining room, an indulgence reserved for days of high satisfaction or low external disturbance. It was a bit of both. As we ate, I asked, if Lucia had gone one step further, if she'd struck the blow herself, would she have gotten away with it? "No," Wolfe said. "She lacks detachment. It would have shown in her posture, her speech. The crime would have been too literal." "But this," I said, "this was performance." "Yes, and one well staged. But theatre, Mr. Goodwin, requires an audience, and an audience, when betrayed, remembers the act longer than the actors anticipate." I smirked. "So you think she's made enemies?" "I think she's made a name," Wolfe said, "and that in itself is dangerous." The next day brought a courier envelope, thick, official, with the embossed logo of the Milan Investment Group. Wolfe opened it after breakfast, slicing neatly through the seal with his butter knife. I watched from across the room, a glass of orange juice in hand and a feeling in my gut. He read the letter silently. Then again, aloud, "Mr. Wolfe, we thank you for your discretion and your insight. Your concern was not unfounded. Miss Fay has been asked to take an indefinite leave of absence. We will be reviewing the leadership structure at Le Cèdre. In the meantime, we trust your silence will remain consistent with the integrity your firm is known for. No signature, just initials. Wolfe folded the letter and handed it to me. "That," he said, "was inevitable. They're cutting her loose, gently. They may recall her later, but not soon." I tossed the letter into the fire. "That'll change the kitchen." "No," Wolfe said. "That will change the air around it. The kitchen will continue to feed people. The knives will stay sharp, but some recipes will never be made again." I got up and poured him a beer. "So what do we call this one?" I asked. "The Case of the Stolen Kitchen Key. Murder à la mode?" He took the glass. "The Apron Stained with Murder, Mr. Goodwin. An accurate title. It began with a uniform and ended with a performance. One stain hid another." I raised my cup. "And we scrubbed it out." "Indeed," he said, lifting his drink. "To vinegar, to salt, to truth." And as the fire popped, quietly beside us, I thought maybe that was justice. Wolfe style, not clean, not easy, but thorough. Just like a proper kitchen, it left no mess unexamined and no flavor unexplored. The brownstone at last was quiet again, until the next knock on the door. It was 2 weeks after the last suspect left the brownstone, and life had resumed its usual clockwork rhythm. Wolfe above with his orchids, Fritz in his kitchen sanctuary, and me juggling the mail, crank calls, and one case involving a missing cat that I was pretending not to take seriously. There's a certain lull that sets in after a particularly layered case, like the city takes a breath just long enough for you to think it might behave. But I've been around long enough to know that the moment you relax, something always finds its way through the cracks. It came in the form of a visit. I was in the office typing up some notes on a wayward insurance swindle Wolfe had squashed in 2 phone calls and a glare, when the doorbell rang. It wasn't Fritz's usual 11:30 grocery delivery or Saul slipping in for a quiet debrief. This bell had the nervous edge of someone who rang it twice, then regretted it. I opened the door and found Lucia Fay standing there. She was dressed in muted grey, smart, clean, corporate. The brash navy dresses and chef's whites were gone. No makeup, no flourish. Her eyes, however, were the same, sharp and guarded, like a woman who'd learned never to put down her sword, only to hide it behind her back. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. "Miss Fay." I stepped aside. "This is unexpected." She entered without a word and waited by the office door until I let her in. Wolfe wasn't in the room, but he wouldn't be far. He rarely missed the scent of disturbance, even when it wore perfume that cost more than my week's groceries. I offered her a seat. She declined. She stood near Wolfe's desk, her arms loosely folded. "I've come to say thank you," she said. "That's original," I said, leaning back. "Most of our visitors open with indignation." "I'm not here to justify what I did," she said, her voice steady but low. "I've already spent every night since trying to." "What happened to Le Cèdre?" I asked. "The investors installed an interim head chef, Dante of all people. He's got a temper, but he knows the kitchen, and people trust him." I stepped aside. "That sounds almost voluntary." It was, not because of what you threatened, but because I realized I was becoming something I hated. I watched a man break and I let it happen. No blood on my hands, but all over my conscience. I didn't say anything. Let the silence fill the room like steam in a closed pot. Wolfe entered, wiping his hands on a linen cloth. He nodded to Lucia without ceremony and took his seat. He didn't offer her one either, which in Wolfe's world was a statement. She inclined her head slightly. "Mr. Wolfe, Miss Fay, I do not often grant follow-up audiences. You are either here to confess or to solicit." "Neither," she said. "I'm here because I owe you a conversation I was too proud to offer." "The first time," Wolfe tilted his head. "Proceed." She inhaled. "You were right, I didn't kill Odette. But I wanted her gone. I believed I could handle the consequences. Let someone else do the dirty work, then pick up the pieces. But the pieces didn't fall the way I planned. Raoul's guilt didn't make me clean. It made me complicit. You paid, Gideon. Wolfe said flatly, Yes. Why? Because I saw the storm coming and I didn't want to be under it. I thought if Raoul fell, I could rise. That's a child's arithmetic, Wolfe said. One collapses, therefore the other ascends. She nodded. I see that now. And what do you want now? Nothing, she said. I've taken a position consulting for a non-profit culinary program, teaching kids how to cook. No prestige, no press, just skills and steel counters. Wolfe's brow lifted half a notch. That is a considerable shift in ambition. It's a reality check, she said, one I didn't know I needed until the silence set in. Wolfe leaned back. You are not forgiven. I didn't come for that. He closed his eyes. Good, because forgiveness, like fine stock, requires time and clarity. I cleared my throat. So this is a farewell visit? It is, she said. And also, she looked between us. You should know something. The investor deal with Milan, it wasn't just money. Odette was planning a buyout, full ownership. Silent partners pushed out, new talent brought in. Raoul was on the block, yes, but so were half the front-of-house staff, the sous chefs, even Leonard. Even you? I asked. Lucia's mouth tightened. Eventually. She was consolidating. Le Cèdre was going to become the Odette show starring no one else. Did anyone else know? Wolfe asked. No, not the staff. But someone on the board had caught wind. There was pressure. Odette wasn't paranoid, she was just too aggressive. And, yet you accelerated the collapse, Wolfe murmured. I didn't plan to, but I didn't stop it either. She looked down, then back up. Mr. Wolfe, I used people, and I got burned. I'll live with that. But I wanted to say it to someone, who saw through me before I saw through myself. Wolfe opened one eye. Then I hope your new kitchen is free of mirrors. She gave a small, rueful smile. So do I. I stood. I'll walk you out. She nodded, and we left Wolfe to his silence. At the door she paused. You ever get tired of seeing people at their worst? All the time, I said. But I like watching what they do next. She looked at me, as if trying to decide if that was a judgment or a compliment. Then she stepped out into the sun, which had decided to show up just for her exit. That evening, as Fritz plated seared scallops with lemon cream and polenta so soft, it could double as a pillow, I asked Wolfe. You believe she meant it? Wolfe took his time with the scallop, chewed, swallowed, dabbed his mouth. I believe in transformation only when it resists performance. She wasn't performing. No, he agreed, but the stage still exists, and some actors never fully leave it. I think she'll stay out of the spotlight, I said. Perhaps, Wolfe said, or perhaps she is simply waiting. For a new script, I raised my glass. Then here's to understudies, Wolfe grunted. Pfui! Dinner proceeded without further philosophy. The case of the apron, bloody, metaphorical and otherwise, was folded, pressed, and shelved. We would forget nothing. We rarely did. But the brownstone was still intact. The orchids still bloomed. And the next knock hadn't come. Yet, in our line of work, the quiet is never permanent, but for now it would do. It was a quiet Thursday, the kind that begins with good coffee and not much else. Wolfe was deep in the plant rooms, muttering in Latin to an oncidium that had apparently refused to present itself in accordance with its breeding. Fritz was in the kitchen experimenting with a chestnut soup, and I was, to my own mild surprise, enjoying the rare sense of closure. Closure in our business is a slippery thing. You never trust it when it shows up wearing a grin. But this time it had stuck around longer than usual. Raoul was awaiting trial. Le Cèdre had moved on under Dante's steady, if volcanic, hand. Lucia had vanished into culinary obscurity by Choice or consequence we didn't know, and Wolfe didn't seem to care. Then the phone rang. I picked it up without thinking. Brownstone, Goodwin speaking. The voice on the other end was young and tentative. Is this where Mr. Wolfe works? Nero Wolfe? You've got him adjacent, I said. I'm Archie Goodwin. What's the problem? Well, I'm not sure if it's a problem. My name is Lily Renault. I'm Odette's sister. That sat me up straighter. Yes, Miss Renault. We remember your sister well. I know, that's why I'm calling. I've just come back to New York. I've been in Paris settling Odette's affairs. There's something you should see. What kind of something? A letter. Written by Odette. She mailed it 2 days before she died. To me. My spine stiffened. She didn't trust anyone at Le Cèdre, Lily said. Not fully, but she was planning something, and she didn't tell me everything. Only that she expected something bad to happen if she went through with it. Do you still have the letter? I do. Bring it here. By noon she was seated in Wolfe's office, the letter clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She was in her early 30s, with Odette's cheekbones but none of her frost. Her eyes flicked anxiously between me and Wolfe, who had returned to his chair with the reluctant gait of a man pulled away from better-smelling company. I didn't know what she meant by this at first, Lily said, placing the envelope gently on Wolfe's desk. But then I read about the arrest and I started wondering. Wolfe took the letter and unfolded it with care. I leaned forward to read over his shoulder, which earned me a grunt, but he didn't swat me away. It was written in a tidy looping hand. Odette's voice came through even in ink. Clipped, intelligent, suspicious. Lily, if anything happens to me, do not assume it was an accident. I've made enemies. That was always part of the game. But I've made one recently who doesn't. Bluff, I'm going through with the Milan deal and I expect retaliation, not from the investors but from someone closer. I've seen eyes watching in the prep room when I'm not speaking. I've found notes moved. Someone tampered with my ledger. And last week, the cold storage key vanished. They're building something around me. I don't know if they'll act. But if I'm found dead, tell the police. Don't trust the first story. Oh, Wolfe exhaled sharply through his nose. That in his world is a full-blown outburst. Miss Renault, he said, folding the letter, you were wise to bring this. If it had surfaced earlier, our strategy might have shifted. Does it change anything now? She asked. It confirms what I suspected, he said. Lucia Fay wasn't simply opportunistic. She was laying groundwork, psychological, procedural, even symbolic. She wanted Odette out, and she was willing to erode her confidence until she made a mistake. Or someone else did, Raoul, I added. Precisely, Wolfe said. But Miss Fay didn't count on Odette noticing the erosion. Lily sat back, her shoulders sagging. I knew they weren't friends, but I didn't know it had gone that far. Few do, Wolfe said. Because the murder appeared to resolve itself. But murder, Miss Renault, is rarely singular in its causes. After Lily left, Wolfe instructed me to retrieve one of the unsigned letters we'd prepared during the final stage of the investigation. The ones detailing Lucia's manipulation, the payoff to Gideon, and her strategic gaslighting of Raoul. I'd given a copy to the investors, but not the press. I presume you intend to send this now, I asked. No, Wolfe said. I intend to send it next week, with a copy of Miss Renaud's letter. A final blow? A conclusive one, he replied. Raoul's trial will begin soon. The defense will seek to soften his guilt. They will attempt to paint Odette as domineering, unstable. This letter reclaims her voice. I nodded. And the rest? The rest is warning, Wolfe said. For those who play games with lives, believing consequence is always someone else's dish. That evening, as rain struck the windows like a metronome, we returned to the dining room. Fritz served duck à l'orange again, not in celebration, but in quiet homage. Odette's signature dish, made with restraint and a more generous hand, on the glaze, Wolfe dined in silence for several minutes, then put his fork down. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes, sir." "What will they say, do you think?" "Who?" "The public, when this comes out." I considered. "Some will say Lucia never committed a crime. That ambition isn't a sin. Others will say Raoul made his own choice." "And you?" I picked up my glass. "I say that in a kitchen full of knives, the person who lays out the cutting board shares the blame." Wolfe nodded. "And the person who finds the stains must name them." The following Monday, the Gazette ran a front page. Editorial, unsigned but unmistakably authored by Lon Cohen, detailing a web of culinary betrayal at one of New York's top restaurants. It didn't name names, it didn't need to. Lucia resigned the next day, quietly. No statement, no photo. Raoul's lawyer issued a press release referencing coercive pressures and toxic conditions. Wolfe rolled his eyes and returned to his orchids. Le Cèdre kept its doors open, but the buzz was gone. The reservations were slower, the kitchen quieter. A place once known for brilliance had acquired a new flavor: memory. That night, Wolfe and I sat in the office, the fire crackling in the grate and the final letter framed behind Wolfe's desk. A reminder, he said, that justice sometimes needs a second course. I looked over at him and said, "So that's it?" He didn't answer, just lifted his glass. "To the truth," he said. "To the end," I replied, "and in that brownstone, where reason ruled and deceit never dined for free, we closed the book." It was a week after Lucia Fay's resignation went public, and for the first time in what felt like years, the phone at the brownstone had gone a full 24 hours without ringing to offer us scandal-adjacent gossip, or a client who wanted us to expose a murderer with a 3-figure budget and a 2-figure IQ. Wolfe was in a state I refer to as active digestion, mentally turning over the case like a rare truffle, savoring every step that had led from a bloodstained apron to the toppling of one of New York's most fearsome culinary figures. I could tell by the way he sat in his chair, legs planted, belly settled and fingers templed just beneath his lips, his eyes not quite closed. The great thinker at peace, or at least in a temporary ceasefire with the world. I'd long since written the final report, filed it in Wolfe's color-coded system, and passed the necessary copies to Kramer, Lon Cohen, and one thoroughly scandalized investor from Milan. And though the case had officially closed, it left behind the particular residue that only certain cases do, the kind that rearrange reputations, careers, and occasionally the moral weather of an entire city block. "You know," I said, swirling the last of my coffee, "we never really talked about whether you were satisfied with how this one ended." Wolfe opened one eye. "Satisfaction is a foolish pursuit. Completion is the goal." "That's a yes, then?" he grunted, which translated from Wolfen meant partially, but don't press your luck. Still, I pressed it. "So, you think Lucia will resurface somewhere else? New kitchen, new knives, new strategy?" "She is too intelligent to disappear," Wolfe said, "but now she knows she can be seen." "Does that make her safer?" "It makes her slower," he replied, "and in her case that will do." I set the cup down. "Funny how the one who snapped wasn't the most dangerous, just the one with no insulation left." Wolfe nodded once. "Raoul was a consequence. Lucia was a cause." "Odette saw it coming," I added. "That letter from her sister, it wasn't just suspicion, it was prophecy." "She underestimated the one who watched her most closely," Wolfe said, "but not entirely. She had begun to leave a trail. Had Raoul failed to act when he did, she might have adjusted course." I thought of Raoul's face the day he confessed. Pale, cracked, almost grateful. The kind of man who'd always followed until one day someone gave him a direction he mistook for a command. "And Gideon?" I asked. "You think he's learned his lesson?" "No," Wolfe said. "But he's cheap and easily frightened. a useful combination in the service of justice. Fritz entered just then with a tray, roast squab with wild rice and glazed shallots. Wolfe perked up like a cactus finally receiving sunlight. As we ate, I considered how rare it was to see Wolfe rattled, even briefly. Lucia had done that. Not with violence, but with cunning. She'd reminded him that the clever can do more damage from the wings than the spotlight. She didn't commit the murder, but she set the stage, lit the footlights, and whispered the lines. "You ever think she wanted to get caught?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said. "She wanted to be above suspicion, but she could not resist seeing how close she could get to the fire. She got burned." "She got warned," Wolfe corrected. "There is a difference." Later that evening, I walked out onto the stoop with a drink in hand, watching the taxis hiss past in the dark, their tires slicing through puddles like impatient tongues. Somewhere in the distance I could just make out the skyline, cold and arrogant but familiar. Thought about all of them. Odette, Raoul, Lucia, even Dante banging pans in a newly inherited kitchen. I thought about how small motives start, like sparks under a heavy pot, how they grow unnoticed until someone opens the lid and the fire roars up in their face. And I thought about Wolfe, already back in his plant room, talking to his orchids, like they were silent witnesses to crimes and corrections alike. Back inside, the brownstone was quiet. Not empty, never that, but settled, ready. Like a well-prepped mise en place before the next order comes in. We'd closed the case, we'd named the stains, and true to form, Wolfe had done it without leaving his chair.